Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
You can subscribe to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast, at iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite download service, and never miss the great content we offer. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Army War College, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
Welcome to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. I'm Ron Granieri, professor of history in the Department of National Security and Strategy at the U.S. Army War College and podcast editor of the War Room. It's a pleasure to have you with us. For 50 years, the Eisenhower Series College Program has been the U.S. Army War College's communication and outreach program designed to encourage dialogue on national security and other policy issues between War College students and the broader public. In pursuit of this dialogue, War College students have traveled across the country, speaking to college classes, voluntary organizations, think tanks, and other public forums. In our age of corona and social distancing, however, the ESCP has unfortunately had to scale back the travels of our students. Here at A Better Peace, we aim to pick up the slack by giving Eisenhower Program participants a chance to share their expertise and insights and to engage in this virtual dialogue with you and the public. Today's podcast is the fourth in an intended series of such episodes. And our topic today is the relationship between the military and higher education in the United States. And our guests today are three members of the U.S. Army War College Class of 2020. First, we have Lieutenant Colonel Aaron J. Sadusky, a native of Centerville, Maryland, and a graduate of the United States Military Academy. Lieutenant Colonel Sadusky holds a master's in international public policy from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and is a career field artillery officer with over 20 years of experience, including service as a U.S. Army Interagency Fellow in the 2011-2012 era, assigned to the U.S. State Department's Afghanistan desk within the President's Special Representative on Afghanistan and Pakistan. We also have Colonel Eric R. Swenson, who was commissioned in the Army Corps of Engineers after graduating from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1998. Colonel Swenson has deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan and served overseas in Germany. He holds a master's and PhD from Penn State in industrial engineering, and upon graduation, he will return to West Point to teach in the Department of Mathematical Sciences. His research interests include healthcare value improvement, the rising cost of DoD healthcare, and its impact on readiness, and maintaining the all-volunteer force. And finally, Lieutenant Colonel Melissa Wardlaw attended Wright State University, where she received her commission and earned an MBA in 1997. Lieutenant Colonel Wardlaw has served in a variety of command and staff positions, to include Force Manager at the Office of the Army Surgeon General, S3 of the 410th Hospital Center, and AMED Recruiting Officer. Welcome to A Better Peace to the three of you, colleagues. Thanks for joining us. I want to start by giving each of the three participants a chance to summarize the topic that they would have spoken of if this were a formal occasion with Eisenhower students. And so, Aaron Sadusky, I'm going to let you go first.
Hey, sure. Thanks, Ron. First, thanks for having us. It's a great opportunity to kind of get to talk about something that's important to me, and then obviously to my peers this afternoon. And so my topic was on the case for mandatory national service. And the way I kind of got to this, or thought this was a relevant topic, is you open any news website this day, you pick a news channel, you pick a newspaper up, and it's readily apparent that our nation's pretty divided. And you can talk about that, whether that's economically, politically, socially, whatever. Add to it, information tends to be more like a currency that we trade and manipulate, and all we kind of see is this civic landscape that seems to be, to me, kind of disturbing. Secondly, I see that it's pretty hard to dispute that we also have a growing civilian-military divide occurring in our country. And so while we still have our armed forces pulling from all over our nation, we're also starting to see that they kind of come from the same regions, predominantly the South and Southwest, and also families of veterans. So you have the proverbial following like in your parents' footprints. So to me, I see our country's kind of drifting apart. And my thought is that mandatory national service is a means to help, one, bridge that civ-mil divide, two, try to remoor ourselves to our national identity, and 3, pull us back together a little bit as Americans. Now, as we have the discussion, I'm sure we can talk about some of the merits, some of the arguments for and against it. I think the big thing up front, always what I always like to make sure I define though, is that I'm not advocating compulsory military service. I actually think that if you want to do that under this model of mandatory service, that's fine. But I want to make sure that when I'm talking about mandatory national service, we move beyond compulsory military service and we don't dovetail ourselves back into a discussion about bringing back the draft, because I wholeheartedly believe in our all volunteer force. Up front, I think our high school students should do about 1 year mandatory service after high school for 1 year. We can talk about how we would pay for that. And the bottom line, though, is I think that kind of will create this little bit more of much needed glue in our society that kind of brings us back together. And I think our people is the strongest part of our nation. And I think mandatory national service will help kind of pull us back together and make us stronger in the end.
All right. Well, thanks, Aaron. That's a good thing to get us started. Eric.
Good afternoon, Ron. Thanks for having us on.
You bet.
So today I'm going to discuss my thoughts on the viability of the all-volunteer force, something that Aaron just mentioned. And really, it's been around for about 50 years. So in 1973, President Nixon signed the all-volunteer force bill into law. The U.S. military, since then, the U.S. military has had to rely on volunteers alone to fill its ranks. And for all the benefits a purely volunteer force provides, and there are numerous benefits, it did not come without risks. I mean, there were risks associated with moving to an all-volunteer force. Today, the demands for high-quality talent, a dwindling propensity to serve, and changing social dynamics in the U.S., I believe, increase the strain on the military, and in particular the Army, to fill its ranks. Furthermore, the inclusion of women in all combat arms ranks of the military begs the question: is the selective service system, as written into law, still constitutional? And regardless of whether it is, should it be updated to include women? And 2, given the dwindling population of U.S. youth that are even eligible to serve, is the selective service system able to fulfill its mandate as written? So these are some of the issues that I'd like to talk about today. And I have some ideas of how the Army can change its recruiting methods to help maintain the viability of all volunteer force, given some of the challenges in the dwindling propensity to serve and some of the changing social dynamics.
Great.
So, look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Melissa.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having us on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast. So what I wanted to talk about today is related to both Aaron and Eric's topic. So while we're all on here together, basically what I believe should happen is a free 13th and 14th grade. So the ability for the U.S. to protect itself around the world depends on our economy. And frankly, the U.S. is not keeping pace in this information age. And it is primarily due to an underperforming educational system. So the U.S. understood that finishing high school was really essential in 1965 when President Johnson signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act into law. And at that time, it really helped us, our economy surge past other countries. And I believe that we're in another inflection point today where at least 2 years of college is essential. In fact, 90% of the jobs created between 2009 and 2018 went to workers with at least some college education. And at the same time, there has been a deep cuts in higher education funding by the states. So we're at a time where the benefit of college has never been greater, but it's less affordable. Therefore, I propose that we offer a free 13th and 14th grade that counts towards college credits. So these students have technically graduated high school, but they're not given diplomas, which will allow them to have the eligibility for state funding for tuition, books, and fees. So in return, building on Aaron's topic, is the students would owe 2 years of either military or civil service in return to the nation. And I do believe that this will also close the civ-mil gap that currently exists in the U.S. So I look forward to the further discussion on this topic.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you to the three of you for, and I know that if in a normal circumstances, right, you would get a chance to speak in greater detail, but I'm hoping we can draw out in our conversation in the next 20 minutes or so of some of the implications of what you're talking about. Because what I hear when I hear each of the three of you is the suggestion that there are things that we're missing as a society, or that we're missing in our students and their preparation. And I guess the big question, the first big question that comes to mind is, in what ways are we as a society right now, when I think about how we're staffing the military, how we're educating people, where exactly are we falling short? And do we think that placing greater requirements on 17 and 18-year-olds is going to solve the problems that we see? I want to go back to you to start off with, Aaron, on this issue of, if we feel like the country is drifting apart, do we think that we can really pull the country back together by essentially putting restrictions on the lives of our 18-year-old high school graduates and saying, you can't start your life until you make up for the fact that the generation that came before you has failed to hold the country together? I phrased that provocatively because I want to really get us started, but let's think about that. If we've had 50 years of all volunteer force and no draft, and now we're going to say, sorry kids, your parents and grandparents messed all this up, and so now we're going to restrict your freedom to fix it. What do you think about that?
So, Ron, I think it's interesting, and I think that's a very interesting question, because it depends who you ask, and I totally unscientific polling, but when I road tested this idea of mandatory national service in a couple of the high schools that I took some Q&A from, and regionally, some were in outside of Pittsburgh, well-to-do area, and then others were in and around the Baton Rouge area, in and near, so that state capital Louisiana, and then in and around Louisiana State University. And surprisingly, most of them thought it was actually a pretty good idea, because I think we find a lot of youth at that age really not sure what they want to do. One. Two, those that aren't quite ready to go to college, they understand, and this kind of goes to what Melissa was saying, is that they also don't want to just incur this huge debt up front and then in something that they may not want to do. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that they have to fix this divide. I think one of the things when you talk about the millennial generation, a lot of them want some kind of fulfillment out of the work that they're doing and not feel like they're just going to be a cog in the machine. And surprisingly, I was kind of pleasantly surprised that a lot of them said, yeah, I could do this for a year. On the flip side, the other part you said in the first part of your question, though, I thought that was interesting, is where are we falling short? I'd say we're falling short in two things. The first thing is we're falling short in trust. And I'm going to answer that from the civ-mil side of this. Harvard's Institute of Politics put out a recent survey, 18 to 24-year-olds in the last 12 months, and they said trust in the U.S. military has actually decreased from 54% down to about 47%. And to me, that's pretty telling, right? As career military officers, the younger generation, the future of our country, less than 50% say they trust in the military. Now, when you take that society wide, our trust is still up there around 70%. So, and some of that's because there's less connection to them. We live on bases, and where we're pulling from is the same thing. The second thing I also think you got to look at is there's a gap in we have less elites serving. There's research out there that says, hey, back in the 50s, half of Princeton's graduating class went to service, and by the turn of the century, 9. And that's disheartening. So anyway, bringing it back together, my thought on national service is you got to put people back together and make them work together, because when you put people in stressful situations, barriers come down. You start to look at diversity and how you tackle problems, and in essence, I think that's one of those ways. I don't think we look at it as a burden that we're putting on the millennial generation, but rather an opportunity to shape our nation in a positive way.
All right. Well, that's a good way to put it. I mean, it is an interesting question about our trust in institutions in this country, because you could say that trust in the military is going down, but the military seems to be way out in front of everybody else, right? I don't know what the nation's trust in university faculty, for example, is, let alone members of Congress or used car salesmen or other things. So that interesting question of the military tends to be out in front when it comes to trust, but even that's declining. I want to bring you in here on Melissa, because I'm intrigued by this idea of adding, what Aaron was talking about, essentially 1 year of service, and you were suggesting adding 2 years of education. And I don't want to get lost in the practical weeds here, but I am curious, why do you think 2 years would be the appropriate time to take people after they've finished 12th grade?
Right. So basically, I'm looking at a year for year. So I'm proposing a 13th and 14th grade. We are in a global, world where modernization of our military. The technical jobs have increased, fourfold, and I truly believe that we need to have, our high schools are not prepared our students to where they need to be to, receive a middle income level job. The high school used to be able to provide that. Now they definitely need at least some type of higher education. And in the military, we have the creation of the Space Force. We have increase in attention of cyber infrastructure and drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. The F-35 is highly technical, and I'm not so sure that our citizens are ready for those type of highly technical jobs. Right. And I also believe that our students are going to look at, or our young citizens are going to look at protecting our homeland more than we ever have before, especially after this pandemic, where the military has, fought overseas. And that's where our foreign policy has shown its attention to. And I think that they're going to want to protect our homeland a little bit more. And to do that, I think that part of that could be the civil service and not just a military service. And, we can put those folks to work within our borders to help pay back for the amount that they're funding for the 13th.
And so the idea is that this is, it was what it sounds like you're saying is that you're essentially requiring students to go to community college, right? Because this is 2 years of post-secondary education, but with curricula that would be somehow more geared towards specific aspects of homeland security, or would students be required to be picking technical subjects?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the path I was taking on this. And I mean, other countries have done it. Some of the states in New York, Oregon have looked into this, have started, the going forward on that path. And I just believe if we took it on instead of at the state level, took it on at the national level, it would create, two things for us. It would create more of a national identity, and it would also help get our skills to where it needs to be in the global world.
Okay. Well, then, and this, of course, leads me then to you, Eric Swenson, to talk about this idea is if we feel like the all-volunteer force is running up against real practical limits. We can't necessarily attract students with the skills that we want, or we can't attract enough of a broad segment of the population. So then what comes after the all-volunteer force?
Well, Ron, that's a great question. I think I'd like to just go back and sort of tie mine into what Melissa said.
Please.
With this 13th and 14th grade. I think about a dozen states in the union right now have a free college, basically a free college for all program. It's normally a promissory type scholarship or a last dollar scholarship that once all your federal aid goes in, students are eligible. States pick up the difference between the cost of a community college education and what they can get through, say, Pell Grants. And so that's already happening. And in the last administration, with some of our presidential candidates, this go around, this election cycle, I've already talked about free college for all, and whether we could do something where the federal government picks up the tab to send people to either a 2 or 4 year degree. I think what I found in my research is that although that would be helpful in the sense of raising the education level and improving our workforce, the challenge we've seen in say, Tennessee, where a recent study was done, it actually showed that when you offer these scholarships, these last dollar scholarships, it actually decreases enlistment in the military. So it undermines our ability to recruit the all-volunteer force. And some of the challenges we have with the all-volunteer force, if you go back to the early 70s under the Gates Commission, which was the commission that Nixon set up to study whether we could move to an all-volunteer force, one of the assumptions they had was that we'd always be able to recruit enough youth to join the military if we provided enough incentives. Mm-hmm. And at the time, the commission estimated that about 70% of youth in America were eligible to serve. Doesn't mean they had the propensity to serve or the willingness to serve, but at least they were mentally fit, they were physically fit, they didn't have a criminal background, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And over the years, we've raised the standards for eligibility into the all-volunteer force, which has paid dividends in the quality of enlistees that we get. But the downside is, well, there's a couple of downsides. One of them is that even though we've gotten some better quality, the requirements, as Melissa, I think, mentioned, have gone up as well with cyber and space, some aviation requirements. The aptitude that we require some of those enlistees to have has gone up, and it's made it harder. And youth have options these days. So if you're in that eligible group of people, that dwindling but eligible group of people that can join, you have options. You're being recruited by lots of people. And in 2019, the Army did a study and said that about 29% of the youth in America today are eligible to serve. So in 50 years, we've kind of gone from somewhere between 70% to 30% or 29%. And that's a challenge. The pool of people that we believe are eligible, that meet the high quality that we want, is dwindling, which undermines in particular the Army's ability to recruit enough soldiers each year to fill our all-volunteer ranks. And so there's some things we need to do, I think, to adjust that.
Sure. Well, I was just thinking about this. I'm of the age where I grew up in the era of the all-volunteer force, but also we could say for the first 20 years of the all-volunteer force, the U.S. Army, the U.S. military deployed to actual military confrontations relatively rarely. But in the last 20 years, we've been kind of on the job every year. And the problem of all of those incentives that were offered to young people to volunteer, job training, money for college, that was all kind of appealing when it was just the idea that you're putting your life on hold for a couple of years, you're wearing a uniform, you've got to wear a shorter haircut, you've got to follow orders, but that you were going to be relatively safe. And at the end of those 2 years, you could go back to your civilian life. Is the problem not only a matter of recruitment, but it's also a matter of United States foreign and security policy that our military is being expected to do a lot more fighting lately than it has for a while? And in other words, is the problem not that the volunteer force is the problem? The problem is that you can't use a volunteer force and be engaged in constant warfare around the world. I throw that open to all three of you, but go ahead, Eric, you go first.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that's where we see the propensity to serve is down. And I think some of the components of propensity to serve is the number of veterans that we have living in America is on the decline. The number of veterans we have serving in say, Congress is on the decline. The high operational tempo, which is a term we use in the military to describe how busy we are. As you had mentioned, over the past 20 years, we have had soldiers engaged in multiple conflicts around the world, nearly nonstop. And I think at last count, the U.S. military has something like 200,000 soldiers in some form or fashion, serving around the world right now. So military service today, for many in the military, means that you're going to spend some time away from home, which if you're trying to use the military to get to college and you have high aptitude, you may have options that can provide you an education without signing up for military service, which those options may not have existed, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Right. Well, and
hey, Eric, can I follow up after you?
Oh, please do, Aaron. Go right ahead.
No, so I think Eric makes a good point. One of the things I think what we also are talking about is in terms of what's the talent pool, and is it evolving with the character of warfare? Do we need traditional infantry men and women, and do they bring the exact same skill sets for people that are going to compete in the cyber domain or bio or nanotechnology or development of hypersonics? I mean, I think one of the things that the Army is still struggling is defining and messaging to the public who we want to bring in. We're always going to have, and I agree with what both of you gentlemen have talked about in terms of there's always going to be a demand for this talent pool of high intensity conflict. But I think we also have placed new demands on our military that are evolving beyond that. And so maybe some of the folks that we're trying to bring in are not going to be your most highly graded out physical fitness folks, but that at the same time they bring a different skill set, because if they can hack into anything in the world, well, that's a unique skill set that we may want to use for military means as well. So I think there's the pool, and this idea is we're all fighting for the same pool of talent, and how is the military going to compete to recruit that? I think some of the changes that Congress has given us in the 2019 NDAA allows us to do that in terms of bringing folks in and looking beyond this 20-year career model, so that we can kind of let folks, as we have certain demands, try to bring people in, and then when they want to leave and go do something else, they can go do something else. So I think that the pool and some of the recruits and how we're looking at this problem may have to evolve as well.
Well, and I think that's a really good way to put it, because one of the ideas, one of the problems with the draftee, with the universal military service, is if you have people who all know that they're coming in and a large percentage of them are only going to serve for the minimum amount of time that they've been drafted for, it's one thing to have them serve as relatively low level recruits in an infantry battalion, for example, as opposed to wanting to find a young person who has real skills, specific skills, and I guess this is where, and I want to come back to you on this, Melissa, is the problem with the relationship between our military and our educational system, right? The military has promised to offer young people a degree of practical training, right? You can graduate high school, but if you really want to learn how to become a mechanic, if you really want to learn aerospace, you really want to learn a kind of technology, you join the service, you work in that, and then either you stay in the service or you go off and use those skills. In what ways and how do we balance the different ideas of the military wanting to offer the chance to gain skills for young people versus the military seeking to find the young people who already have the skills that the military needs? And what is the educational role of the military in this stage, especially at that basic recruit level, when we think of that 18 to 22-year-old recruit?
Yes, right. That's a very good question. I actually thought about that, and I think that if we offer the 13th and 14th grade, that they will receive some of that education, so it will lessen the burden on the military. I can imagine that the AIT, the tech schools, are going to be longer to provide the type of training that you're talking about in the high information type of military that we're going into. If you look at the future of 2035 military, it's very futuristic, and I do believe that it will decrease the amount of, and the military can also get involved in some of the curriculum. I'm not saying that they would, it would be overbearing, but they can provide some input on what our nation needs to protect itself. I also think that it will decrease the defense budget and spending in the GI Bill, which right now is about $11 billion in annual federal support and $485 million in tuition assistance funding. It will decrease that. So I think that the relationship with the education and the military, I just see nothing but benefits. And when you were talking about, I'm just going to pivot a little bit to
go right ahead.
Okay, so the prior question about how the military has fought on foreign soil. And as I mentioned before, I really do think that we need those forces over there, but in a very limited, scope. So, some of our vital interest, NATO, protecting Eastern Europe from Russia, perhaps deterring conflict in Asia, those type of things are things that we still need to do. But perhaps we can lessen the amount that we have in the Middle East, some parts of the Pacific where there's just not a whole lot of vital interest, and focus more on our homeland. And I think that our young students that are coming out of college are thinking in the same way. When I think about the military and this new COVID-19 pandemic, I think that that's what they're going to request and require our military to focus, more on the homeland. And also, I think that the younger generation is also more open to social programs and expanding the democracy in social realms and not just political realm.
So the idea is that we can find a way to draw on the desire of young people to make a contribution to society.
Yes.
In a way that and that contribution can be in uniform, can be out of uniform, but that there should be a kind of fluid sense of what national service means, so that people can do what their skills best allow them to do to serve the country.
Exactly. Very well said. Thank you.
But and there are so many other threads to pull on here, right? The relationship between military policy and larger national security policy, the question of how does the United States rethink its vital national interests that need to be served by the military in the future, in an era after COVID. And, so much of what the Eisenhower program is built to do is to give a chance for students here at the War College to not only to reflect on the relationship with between the civilian and military society, but also to make their contribution to it. And while I'd love for all of you to have the chance to speak in front of as many audiences as possible, I'm afraid that this conversation for today has to come to an end. But it's been a real pleasure to get us all started thinking about the ways that we imagine the role of young people in building a better society for the future, and the role of the military in helping young people to do that. I want to thank Aaron Sadusky, Eric Swenson, and Melissa Wardlaw for joining us here on A Better Peace. So thanks so much to the three of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Then I want to thank all of you for listening in. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's piqued your interest in the Eisenhower program, in the students we have here at the War College, and in questions of national service. I hope that you will tune in to future conversations on A Better Peace so that you can hear more about how we talk about these kinds of questions here. Please send us your suggestions for future programs and your comments on this one. And please, if you listen to A Better Peace, please subscribe to it on the podcatcher of your choice. And please rate and review this podcast so that others may find their way to it as well. We look forward to seeing you here on A Better Peace in the near future. But until next time, from the War Room, I'm Ron Granieri.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu, and have a great day.